I want to spend a few minutes talking about the Niagara Peninsula Conservation Authority. It actually serves 500,000 people in Niagara, encompassing the entire Niagara region, portions of Hamilton and Haldimand. And so that board actually has a member from Haldimand, a couple of members appointed from Hamilton. The rest are from the Niagara Peninsula. And the vast majority of them are elected regional politicians. The Niagara Peninsula is one of the most complex watersheds in Ontario, managing over 2,870 hectares of some of the most sensitive and unique natural areas in the region, all of which is held in a public trust. And it includes areas drained by the Niagara River, 20 Mile Creek, the Welland River, the Welland Canal, Lake Erie, and Lake Ontario. The legislation to the legislative mandate of the Conservation Authority, as set out in the Act that we've seen here, is not what we're seeing in the Niagara Peninsula. And you know, the NPCA has been under a lot of controversy over the last 3 years, and I think most of it started with the restructuring under a new Board of Governors, where about 15, I think it was like 25% of the employees were let go at that time. The environmentalists were let go, you're right, and these people didn't have a union at the time, so they were just, here's your package, goodbye, see you around. Some of them with 20, 25 years experience. And what happened was that is kind of continued to happen. These people actually eventually joined OPSU. They got a collective agreement, but their life hasn't been made any easier since then, except that they now have a voice and the right to file a grievance and do those kinds of things. Then the piece that really brought some controversy was the Thundering Waters in Niagara Falls, which is a huge property, which is mostly wetlands. And 2 years ago, a Chinese-based GR investment company bought 196 hectares of land west of Marineland and adjacent to the Thundering Waters Golf Club in Niagara Falls. $1 billion development is proposed in Niagara, which could be used as a provincial pilot for biodiversity offsetting. So this is when kind of the MNR gets involved. Actually, even the Premier got involved while she was on her trip to China. She actually witnessed the signature of the Mayor of Niagara Falls to try and promote this project in one of the last pieces of Carolinian forest and wetlands in the Niagara area. And so there then became a lot of environmentalists concerned, and this kind of came to the forefront. There's been lobbying done of the provincial government, and I'm glad the minister is actually here today because, you know, we've sent letters to Minister McGarry, we sent letters to Minister Morrow before that, and the regional chair and other members of the NPCA actually were involved in trying to make this one of the first biodiversity offsetting projects here in the Niagara region. But the problem with that is that most of it is wetlands. The vast majority of it is either wetlands or bufferlands. And so, although in principle it sounded like a good idea, stakeholders in the community have thought otherwise. I was into the Thundering Waters a couple of weeks ago, and it is an amazing place. So it's bordered by kind of a subdivision and a bit of an industrial area. It was 85 degrees that day, hot, humid, and when you walked 20 feet into this forest, it was like 15 degrees cooler. I say that, you know what, there's lots of brownfields in Niagara to develop, and we don't have to be developing major projects on the last of our protected lands. So the tour was led by a young man named Owen Borgen, and he gave us quite an education. He'd done a lot of research about this, and it's just really 1 hour south of here. and the 330 acres of the 484 are provincially significant wetlands. And you know, it seems to me that although we're getting these letters from MNR about how this project doesn't meet the requirements that would be needed to develop this, we're not kind of vocally hearing this stuff. And although we've heard from the NPCA that they agree, you know, that they're going to follow the mandate and do all those kinds of things, it's still, you know, this is still rolling along with people lobbying to try and get this project forward. That's only one of the problems within the NPCA. It, as I say, is a conservation authority that has gone rogue, and those are not my words. Those are actually the words of some conservation authority members that I've talked to outside of the Niagara region. The NPCA's mission is to balance the interests of the environment along with development. And the interests of municipal and regional councils often differ from conservation authorities because they're worried about raising some more taxes to try and offset tax increases and to improve their services, where conservation authorities should actually be looking after protecting wetlands and protecting the environment. Now, there's been this whole issue that has come up with the NPCA where actually private members of the public are being sued for sharing their information. Slap suits. Ed Smith, a retired, respected military guy who spent his entire career in the military. 2 regional councillors who actually shared the information through an email to other regional councillors to ensure that they got the information. They're also being sued by somebody. There's a number of lawsuits going on. I even was threatened to be sued by a company who had ties to Mr. Petrowski, a regional councillor from St. Catharines, who had or maybe worked for this company, and I was threatened with a suit if I didn't basically shut up about this company. Other issues that have come up with the NPCA, we had 2 sitting board members. So when Minister McGarry talks about perhaps having some authority, at least set some criteria for what board members should bring to the table at conservation authorities, I don't necessarily disagree with her. So we had 2 sitting board members who took leaves of absence, and then one of them actually was let a contract. A contract with the NPCA, and then both of them ended up with top jobs at the NPCA while they were sitting board members. So David Barrick, a regional councillor, who also was a board member at the NPCA, he actually ended up with a very senior position at the NPCA that he hadn't even applied for. He'd applied for another one, and he wasn't qualified for it, and so they just gave him the other job that was available. Jobs of the people that they had terminated a few months before. And then the other board member, Carmen D'Angelo, he took a leave of absence, and then he became the CAO of the NPCA. And then later, the right wing of regional government, they promoted him to the CAO of the region of Niagara. And so you can see where this story is going. There have been Bill Hodgson, who was a regional councillor, and is a regional councillor, was the former mayor of Lincoln. You will know him. Bill Hodgson was on the NPCA board. He was the only person who was questioning the decisions, or one of the few that was questioning the decisions. I correct myself. And he had a smear campaign against him, and eventually he resigned from that board. You know, they talked about, they talked about kind of not lobbying and not kind of on the biodiversity offsetting, but I've just come across a letter from a law firm who said that they actually were working for the NPCA, along with working for the region of Niagara, to actually try and get this billion-dollar project back on the rails at the expense of it. Well, There was a land deal in Wainfleet that was very early on.